Hey guys, tonight we drift into the land between two rivers, a place where the ground is damp with promise, where reeds whisper in the breeze, and the air smells faintly of mud and barley. You find yourself standing on the banks of the Tigris and the Euphrates, watching the water twist and shimmer in the fading light. The sky above stretches wide and pale, as if it has never known a city skyline. It's here on this soft soil that humanity takes its first hesitant steps toward building something bigger than a village, something that might last. So take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing the little constellation of places and hours where these stories find you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The reeds sway, and you begin to hear the faint murmurs of people gathering. The air is heavy with the smell of damp earth fish pulled fresh from the river and the smoke of small cooking fires. Villagers bend over baskets woven from those same reeds, their hands dark with clay. They are not just surviving anymore, they are organizing. They look to the rivers for more than water. The floods here are both gift and curse. When the waters rise just enough, they leave behind a layer of rich silt perfect for growing barley, dates, and wheat. But when the floods come too high or too late, fields drown or crack into dust. You feel the tension, the need for order, as though the land itself demands cooperation. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians began as scattered farmers who gradually united, or whether migrating peoples brought with them the seeds of urban life. Either way, you stand now at the threshold of the world's first cities, a threshold where mud and water turn into temples and walls. There is a curious tidbit told about these early days. The people believed the rivers themselves were gods. Not merely gifts from the heavens, but beings with moods sometimes generous, sometimes destructive. They offered sacrifices at the water's edge, whispering prayers into the rushes, hoping that their small voices could sway such mighty currents. You picture it, families crouched together, holding tiny clay figurines, their eyes fixed on the river's gleaming surface, as if waiting for an answer. Behind them, small clusters of huts rise from the plain roofs, thatched with reeds, walls daubed with clay. You watch as one hut becomes 2, then 10, then a cluster that feels more permanent, more ambitious. Paths trampled flat by bare feet begin to twist between them. A child drops a toy made of clay, a tiny animal no bigger than your palm, and laughs as it crumbles. Already clay is more than just mud, it's memory, story, and structure. You hear the hum of conversation at dusk, the beginnings of collective decisions. Who will repair the canal when it clogs? Who will decide how much grain is kept for winter? Who will appease the gods when the sky refuses to rain? Authority doesn't yet wear a crown, but it's forming as sure as the walls of these huts. As night settles, the stars shine brilliantly unclouded by smoke or light. People lie back on woven mats, staring upward, naming constellations, as if pinning their stories to the sky. You imagine the quiet thrill to be part of something larger, to feel the first pulse of what will become civilization. The rivers continue their whispering song. They carry silt fish reeds and the secrets of the future. In this moment you realize you are watching the dawn of cities, the beginning of a story that will stretch from ziggurats to empires and eventually to ruins that modern archaeologists will dig from the sand. The morning sun rises gently over the flat horizon, painting the land in pale gold. You wander through the mist, rising from the riverbanks, stepping softly where reeds bend under your feet. The air smells of wet clay, and soon you hear the scrape of hands shaping it. Villagers crouch by the water's edge, scooping mud into baskets, mixing it with straw, and pressing it into molds. These crude bricks left to bake in the sun are the bones of the world's first cities. You pause to watch them lay the bricks one by one along the base of a wall. A line of reed huts once stood here, fragile against storms and floods, but now mud brick rises instead, sturdy, solid, promising permanence. Historians still argue whether these early builders were motivated more by protection from raiders or by the need to mark sacred space. Either way, every brick is a claim: this is our place, this is our home. There is a curious tidbit from archaeology: the earliest temples and homes were not built in grand isolation, but right beside one another, sometimes sharing walls. Imagine the intimacy of that: your neighbor's laughter filtering through mud brick, the smoke of their fire slipping through cracks, the thin space between your prayers and theirs. Cities were not born in grandeur, but in closeness, in the weaving together of many lives into one pattern. You walk further and notice the use of reeds. They are everywhere, woven into mats for floors, tied into roofs, twisted into ropes, even pressed into bricks as reinforcement. The reeds whisper in the wind as if laughing quietly at their own importance. Without them, walls crumble, baskets split, boats sink. Yet no one stops to admire a reed. They are simply there, like the air itself, holding up a civilization quietly. As you wander into the heart of the settlement, you see the first signs of something greater, a platform of bricks raised higher than the houses around it. Children chase one another across its base, giggling, while priests in simple robes argue softly over how tall it should be. They say the gods deserve a dwelling above the common folk, closer to the sky. And so from bricks of mud and stalks of reed, the first temples begin to rise. The smell of wet earth lingers, mingled with the sweet scent of date palms. A woman sits by her doorway, grinding barley on a stone slab, her hands moving in a steady rhythm. The sound is soft, almost like music: scrape, 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 grinding grain into flour. Beside her, a child shapes leftover clay into a little figurine, a bull with stubby horns. "The bull is sacred," she whispers, "and if treated kindly, it will bless the household." The figure cracks in the sun, but the belief stays firm. Historians still debate how organized these early communities truly were. Did they already have rulers directing work, or were they families acting in loose cooperation? What is clear is the collective spirit, neighbors working side by side, building walls not only of mud, but of trust. One brick alone is fragile. A wall many bricks thick holds steady through storm and flood. The day stretches on and you feel the heat rising. The sun hardens the bricks, baking them into permanence. Shadows stretch across the walls, giving them texture, almost like wrinkles on the skin of a very old being. You run your hand across one wall and feel the grit of straw poking through the surface. These walls will not last forever. Rain will wash them back into mud. Yet for now they stand proud in their simplicity, a statement that people here will no longer live only in tents or reed huts. As night falls again, the walls glow faintly in torchlight. Families gather inside, sheltered from wind and wandering beasts. They share bread, baked on hot stones, drink water, scooped from clay jars, and watch the stars rise above their new homes. The air is filled with the murmur of conversation, the soft crackle of fire, the rhythm of humanity settling into something enduring. And you, walking among them, realize that clay and reeds are more than materials. They are memory, resilience, and the first breath of a story that will stretch across millennia. The sun climbs higher and the settlement hums with fresh energy. You follow a winding path toward the raised platform of bricks you saw earlier. This time it towers higher layers, stacked like steps of a giant stairway. Priests and laborers climb up and down, balancing baskets of mud on their shoulders, their voices mixing with the grunt of effort. Here before your eyes, the first ziggurat begins to take shape. Its base is wide and square, a mountain of clay carved from the flat plain. Each level is a terrace, narrowing as it rises, as if stair-stepping toward the sky. Historians still argue whether these structures were built purely for worship, or if they also stood as proud markers of power monuments saying, "We can move the earth itself." Either way, the sight is mesmerizing, a temple climbing up from mud, aspiring toward the stars. There is a curious tidbit recorded in later Sumerian hymns. They believed the top of the ziggurat was a place where heaven and earth touched. The gods might descend through the air to meet their priests as if the stairways of brick were ladders for divine feet. Imagine the awe of standing at the summit, the wind tugging at your robes, looking out across endless flat land and knowing you had climbed into sacred space. As you drift closer, you notice the workers pressing patterns into the wet bricks, little marks to keep track of which families contributed. This isn't just architecture, it's a community ledger. Each brick bears witness to someone's hands, someone's labor, someone's offering to the gods. In a way, the ziggurat is also a story told in clay. The sounds of construction mix with other rhythms. A man beats a drum to keep workers in, step its hollow boom echoing off the walls. Women bring jars of water from the river, pouring it over tired hands and cracked lips. Children scamper up the half-finished steps, shrieking with laughter, until a priest shoos them away with a stern wave. The entire city seems to orbit around this growing tower like bees circling their hive. You step inside a nearby shrine at the base, cool and dim after the heat outside. The walls are plastered smooth, decorated with painted symbols of stars, rivers and bulls. A priestess kneels before a small altar, pouring oil into a lamp. She whispers to Inanna, goddess of love and war, asking for blessings on the workers and safety for the city. The flicker of flame casts her shadow high upon the wall as though the goddess herself had answered. Outside you walk around the ziggurat and see it mirrored in the canals that surround the city. Water flows in careful channels, shimmering like ribbons of silver. Date palms line the edges, their fronds rustling in the breeze. From a distance, the reflection of the unfinished temple shivers in the canal's surface, making it seem taller, as if rising from the very waters that sustain life here. Historians still debate whether the first ziggurats were painted in bright colors, whitewashed plaster-glazed blue tiles, or gilded with shining metals, or whether they remained plain mud brick. In your mind's eye, you can imagine both the dazzling version glittering under the sun and the humbler one, a brown mountain blending with the earth. Either way, it stands as a reminder that humanity's dreams have always been taller than the horizon. As the day fades, torches are lit along the terraces. The ziggurat glows with dots of flame, each one swaying in the wind like stars caught on earth. People gather in the square, singing hymns, their voices carrying upward. For a moment, the boundary between heaven and earth feels thin, as if the gods truly might descend the steps to join the crowd. And you standing in the torchlight realize that these towers are more than brick and mud. They are prayers written in architecture, aspirations, turned solid, a bridge between human hands and the endless sky above. The streets are lively with chatter, the hum of voices bouncing off mud brick walls. You follow the sound into a shaded courtyard where men in long cloaks gather in a circle. They lean on staffs, speak in careful tones, and glance toward the raised platform where the temple rises. Here in the heart of this early city, you witness power beginning to take shape, not with swords or crowns, but with councils and kings. At first, Leaders are chosen for practical tasks. One man oversees the digging of irrigation canals, another resolves quarrels over fields. The priests, however, hold a different kind of authority. They claim to speak for the gods, to know when the flood will rise, to read omens in the stars. You see them step into the circle, their robes trimmed with coloured fringe, their voices calm and persuasive. The others bow, slightly acknowledging a power that is less about muscle and more about mystery. Historians still argue whether kingship in Sumer began as temporary leadership during crisis like a flood or an invasion, or whether it was priestly authority that hardened into political rule. Either way, you watch as a man is singled out. He is taller than the rest, his beard carefully oiled, his eyes steady. The crowd murmurs approving. He will guide them, they decide, and though they call him Lugal Big Man, the title already feels heavier, as if it carries the weight of destiny. There is a curious tidbit whispered in later Sumerian texts. Some kings claim to be chosen directly by the gods, plucked from obscurity by divine will. One legend tells of a humble shepherd suddenly elevated his crook, traded for a scepter. The people believed such stories not only because they honored the gods, but because they explained why one ordinary man should rule over many. To follow him was to follow heaven's plan. You wander among the crowd, sensing both excitement and unease. Some whisper that the Lugal's power should be limited, watched carefully by the elders and priests. Others say a strong leader is necessary, someone to protect them from rival cities and unpredictable rivers. The debate is gentle now, but you feel its undercurrent. It will not always remain so. The new Lugal steps onto a low platform. His robe is simple, yet the way he holds himself marks the difference. He raises his staff carved from palm wood and speaks in a voice that carries across the courtyard. He promises to oversee the canals, to ensure the gods are honored, to bring justice in disputes. His words are measured steady, like stones laid carefully in a wall. The people nod, some relieved, some skeptical, but all attentive. Nearby scribes press clay tablets to record agreements. Their styluses scratch softly lines, forming wedges that fix decisions into permanence. The council's words will not vanish with the wind. They will be baked into clay, lasting long after the voices fade. You notice how the Lugal glances at the tablets with a mix of pride and caution, aware that his promises are now etched in something more enduring than memory. The city bustles around this moment. Children chase each other between stalls where merchants display jars of oil, baskets of grain, trinkets of copper. Women grind barley, their rhythm echoing like distant drums. Priests carry offerings into shrines, their chants rising like smoke. Amid all this, the Lugal's voice lingers, threading through the air like a new melody, reshaping the city's song. Historians still debate how much power these first kings truly held. Were they absolute rulers, or more like managers under the watchful eyes of priests? The truth may lie somewhere in between, shifting with time, bending with circumstance. What you feel standing here is the tension between cooperation and command, between the shared work of many and the singular will of one. As the sun sets, the courtyard glows with torchlight. The Lugal remains on the platform, his silhouette sharp against the rising ziggurat. Around him, the council disperses slowly, their voices fading into the night. The people return to their homes, carrying stories of promises made of power, beginning to settle into shape. And you, watching from the shadows, realize you have seen something fragile yet profound, the birth of kingship, the first step toward authority that will echo across centuries, binding together the destinies of cities, rivers, and gods. The morning light spills across the courtyard, and you follow its glow into a quieter corner of the city. There, beneath a thatched awning, men sit cross-legged before shallow trays of wet clay. Each one holds a reed stylus, its tip cut to a wedge. Their hands move with steady rhythm, pressing tiny shapes into the soft surface triangles, wedges, lines. The marks are simple, yet together they form something powerful, the world's first written words. The styluses click softly like rain tapping against stone. You lean closer and see the symbols arranged in neat rows, each one capturing a count of sheep jars of grain or measures of beer. At first, writing is practical, a way to tally trade and offerings to the gods. But you sense the enormity of what is happening. Memory itself is being given a body pressed into clay that will outlast the voices that spoke it. Historians still argue whether writing arose purely for economic necessity, keeping track of goods, or whether it began as a sacred tool tied to temples and rituals. What is certain is that once clay began to hold words, nothing was ever quite the same again. There is a curious tidbit told in later myths. The god, Enki, wise and mischievous, was said to have gifted humanity with knowledge, including writing. Imagine the awe of the first Sumerian who realized marks on clay could speak for him long after he was gone. To them it must have felt like divine magic. You crouch beside one of the scribes and watch as he carefully finishes his work. He smooths the edges of the tablet with his palm, then sets it aside to dry in the sun. Others will be baked in kilns hardened to survive centuries. In this moment, though, they are soft and vulnerable, like the memories they carry. A careless handprint or spilled drop of water could erase them forever. Nearby, a young boy peers over his father's shoulder, his eyes wide as he mimics the shapes with his finger in the dust. The scribe laughs softly, erasing the marks with a swipe, but the boy tries again, determined. Already you see how writing will pass to the next generation, not just as skill but as legacy. The city around you hums with the effects of this new invention. Merchants carry clay tablets tucked into baskets, proof of debts owed or goods promised. Priests store tablets in temple rooms, recording rituals, offerings, even dreams interpreted as messages from the gods. You picture shelves lined with these clay squares, an archive of human thought in its infancy. Historians still debate whether these earliest signs should be called true writing, or whether they were just accounting marks. Yet as you watch a scribe pause, tilt his head, and scratch a wedge that seems more like a name than a number, you feel the boundary blur. Words are beginning to move beyond numbers. They are starting to tell stories. The air grows hot, and the smell of baked clay drifts from a nearby kiln. Women carry baskets of bread, stopping to chat with the scribes. One offers a loaf in exchange for a record of her sale. Another simply smiles, watching the marks take shape. For many, writing is still mysterious, a craft of specialists, yet slowly its reach spreads, seeping into every part of life like water into soil. As dusk settles, the scribes gather their tablets into neat stacks, each one glowing faintly in torchlight. Their shadows stretch long across the walls, the wedge-shaped marks flickering like patterns of stars. You realize that here, under reed awnings and smoky torches, humanity has given birth to something eternal, the ability to speak across time, to let clay remember when flesh forgets. And as you step back into the night, the soft clicks of styluses still echo in your ears like the heartbeat of a new world. The city grows louder as evening settles in, but tonight you are drawn to the center square, where a circle of people gathers around a fire. The flames leap and sway, throwing sparks into the darkening sky. At the heart of the crowd sits a singer, his voice deep and steady, his hands beating a drum. He sings not of grain or trade, but of heroes and gods, and his words carry you far beyond the walls of the city. The story is of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, whose fame stretches like the walls he built. His voice echoes in the singer's chant, Gilgamesh, 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, restless proud, and searching for meaning. Beside him strides Enkidu, wild man of the steppe, tamed by friendship, fierce in loyalty. Their adventures are more than entertainment. They are lessons woven into rhythm and rhyme. Historians still argue whether Gilgamesh was a real ruler of Uruk, his deeds exaggerated into myth, or whether he was purely a creation of story. Yet the Epic of Gilgamesh survives as one of the oldest written tales etched into clay tablets that still whisper across 4,000 years. There is a curious tidbit embedded in the epic, the story of a great flood sent by the gods to cleanse the earth. It mirrors flood myths from other cultures, stories carried across time and continents. You hear the singer's voice rise as he tells of Utnapishtim's survivor, of the deluge builder of a boat that saved life itself. The people listen wide-eyed, some nodding knowingly as though remembering their own river's unpredictable rage. Children lean forward, their shadows flickering on the walls. Merchants pause, their bargaining priests lower their voices, and soldiers lean on their spears. For this moment the whole city breathes together, carried by the rhythm of words older than memory. The singer's voice shifts low and mournful, recounting Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh's grief, and his desperate search for immortality. The fire crackles as though weeping with him. You look up and notice the ziggurat glowing faintly in the torchlight, its terraces looming like the mountains Gilgamesh once climbed in the tale. The connection is impossible to ignore. The people of Sumer build not just in mud and stone, but in story. Their walls and temples may crumble, but their legends hold firm. The air smells of smoke and roasted barley. A woman hums along her voice, weaving with the chant. A child clutches a clay figurine of a bull, perhaps imagining it as the bull of heaven, sent by the goddess Ishtar to punish Gilgamesh. For them, the story is not distant history. It is alive, breathing through the night, teaching them about courage, loss, and the price of defying gods. Historians still debate whether the epic was performed first as oral song before being pressed into clay, or whether the written form created the rhythm for singers to follow. Yet as you listen to the rise and fall of the chant, you realize the debate hardly matters. What matters is the way the story flows, binding the city in shared imagination, a dream told aloud beneath the stars. The singer finishes with a long, trembling note. The crowd exhales together as if waking from a dream. Some wipe tears from their eyes. Others smile faintly, lost in thought. Slowly they drift back to their homes, carrying fragments of the tale with them, to be whispered again in courtyards, repeated in market stalls, etched in clay, and sung by other voices. And you, lingering by the fire's dying embers, realize you have just witnessed something timeless, the birth of epic, the moment when myth becomes memory, and memory becomes story. The morning is warm, and you step beyond the city walls into the fields where the heart of Sumer truly beats. The land stretches flat and wide, the horizon softened by shimmering heat. Channels of water crisscross the fields, glinting in the sunlight, leading from the great rivers to rows of barley swaying gently in the breeze. Here, in the steady rhythm of ploughs and water, you find the foundation of the world's first urban life. Farmers bend low, their feet sunk in mud, guiding wooden ploughs pulled by oxen. The animals grunt their hooves, pressing deep into the soil, their horns decorated with little tassels of reeds. Children run along the canals with clay pots, splashing water into ditches to keep the furrows damp. The smell of wet earth mixes with the sharp scent of grain, a perfume of labor and life. Historians still argue whether Sumer's prosperity came more from innovation, its canals, ploughs, and levees, or from luck, the unique fertility of its land between the Tigris and Euphrates. What is clear as you walk here is the balance nature provides, but only if humans coax it, carefully guiding rivers that can nurture or destroy. There is a curious tidbit known from ancient tablets. The Sumerians measured barley not just as food, but as currency. Workers might be paid in handfuls of grain, priests might receive offerings of barley beer. You picture it now, a farmer carefully counting out his wages in sacks of food, his wealth stacked not in coins but in loaves waiting to be baked. As you wander further, you hear the creak of a shadoof, a long wooden pole balanced on a post with a bucket at one end and a counterweight at the other. A farmer pulls the bucket down into a canal, then lets it swing up, spilling water over the fields. The rhythm is slow, but sure, a dance of wood and water repeated endlessly beneath the sun. The fields ripple with more than barley. Rows of date palms rise along the canals, their fronds rustling softly. Women climb them with practiced ease, cutting clusters of fruit that shine like golden drops. Dates are sweet, long-lasting, and traded far beyond the city. Their sticky scent clings to your fingers as you imagine biting into one, the taste of Sumer's orchards lingering on your tongue. The canals themselves are alive. Frogs croak from the banks, fish dart beneath the surface, birds swoop low to snatch insects. Farmers pause to watch, laughing softly as though the fields are not just work, but home, a place where life hums in every corner. Yet they know the rivers must be tamed. Too much water and fields drown. Too little and the land cracks into dust. You sense the worry in their eyes, the way they glance at the sky at the river's edge, always calculating, always waiting. Historians still debate whether droughts or floods played the greater role in Sumer's eventual decline. Even now you see how fragile it all is. A broken canal wall could mean famine. A dry season could send families wandering in search of food. Civilization depends on mud water and hope. The day grows hot and workers retreat to the shade of palm groves. They share flatbread baked on hot stones, dip it in jars of oil, and pass around clay cups of beer. The beer is thick, more like porridge than drink, and they sip it through reed straws, laughing as the foam tickles their lips. This is the taste of celebration, the reward for a day in the fields. As the sun sinks, the fields glow golden, the canals reflecting fire-red streaks. Farmers gather tools, oxen plod home, and the air cools with the promise of rest. From the city you hear faint music drifting, a flute, a drum, a voice raised in song. The land itself seems to sigh content for now, as if it too has settled into the rhythm of Sumerian life. And you, walking along the canal, realize that this humble dance of water and grain is what makes cities possible. Without fields of barley and rows of date palms, there would be no walls, no ziggurats, no epics. Civilization begins in mud, in sweat, in the slow turning of rivers into bread. The river flows broad and slow, its surface shimmering beneath the midday sun. You stand on the bank as boats drift past, their curved hulls made of bundled reeds coated in bitumen to keep them watertight. Men push them along with long poles or raise square sails that flap gently in the warm breeze. Each vessel carries goods stacked high, sacks of grain, baskets of dates, jars of oil, copper ingots that glint in the light, and even lumps of lapis lazuli, so blue they seem to hold pieces of the sky. The city hums with trade, its heartbeat tied not just to the fields, but to the rivers that connect distant worlds. Merchants unload baskets onto the docks, shouting prices and names, their voices rising above the splash of water. Donkeys bray as they carry goods further inland, their hooves striking dusty roads that stretch toward other towns. The smell of tar, grain, dust and fish blends into the thick summer air. Historians still argue how far Sumerian traders truly roamed. Some evidence points to connections as far as the Indus Valley, others suggest closer exchanges with Anatolia and Iran. What is certain is that these rivers carried more than cargo. They carried ideas, stories, and symbols, weaving a web of contact across the ancient world. There is a curious tidbit. One of the most prized imports was cedar wood from Lebanon. In a land nearly treeless, Sumerians treasured these timbers, imagining them as gifts from gods, worthy for temples and palaces. You picture a barge creaking under the weight of cedar logs, their resinous scent filling the air, drifting downriver toward a city eager for strong beams and sacred halls. You follow the trail of goods into the bustling market. The square is alive with color and sound. Women in long woolen skirts haggle over baskets of figs. A man plays a flute to attract customers to his stall, where he sells beads of carnelian and shells polished smooth by the sea. Children chase each other between stalls, their laughter weaving through the murmur of bargaining voices. Merchants shout offers: 2 jars of barley beer for 1 goat, a basket of dates for a lump of copper. Clay tablets are exchanged alongside goods contracts etched in wedges to fix promises in place. You watch as a scribe presses his stylus into soft clay, recording that one man owes another 3 measures of wool. The crowd nods approvingly. Words in clay make deals harder to break. The air thickens with scent, roasting fish fresh bread, the tang of onions. In one corner, a brewer stirs a vat of beer, steam rising as he tests the froth. He offers you a sip. Through a reed straw, the flavor, earthy and thick with a hint of sweetness. He laughs when you cough. It's an acquired taste, he assures you, but one that Sumerians love more than water itself. Beyond food and trade, you sense something larger at play. Each boat, each caravan ties the city to a greater whole. A shell from the Gulf, a gemstone from far-off mountains, a timber from distant forests, all become part of temples, ornaments, and offerings to the gods. The city grows not just from what the land provides, but from threads spun outward, pulling the world in. Historians still debate whether it was trade or warfare that spread Sumerian influence most strongly. Yet here, amid the lively cries of merchants and the splash of oars, it feels clear trade is the gentler conqueror. It binds strangers with the promise of breadcloth and copper, and once bound, they share more than goods, they share imagination. As evening falls, the boats return to the river, their sails catching the fading light. The marketplace quiet stalls are covered, and the smell of cooling embers lingers. The last barges drift away, carrying grain outward and bringing whispers inward. And you, standing by the dock, realize that Sumer's rivers are more than water. They are lifelines, pulling cities together, weaving civilization into one flowing song. Night falls soft over the city, and you follow the glow of oil lamps toward the sacred quarter. The air is thick with incense, sweet and resinous, drifting from doorways where worshippers gather. You hear the steady beat of drums, the low hum of chants, and the shuffle of sandaled feet. Here the Sumerians give voice to their gods, beings as real to them as the rivers and the wind. You step into a courtyard where statues gleam in flickering torchlight. One is tall and stern with a horned crown, and the sky father ruler of heaven. Another holds a spade, the symbol of authority, Enlil, master of wind and storms. A third, radiant and mysterious, is Inanna, goddess of love, war, and the morning star, her stone eyes catching firelight like twin embers. Nearby, Enki, the trickster and bringer of wisdom, is carved with flowing water, spilling from his shoulders. These are not distant deities, they are woven into the city's very breath. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians saw their gods as benevolent protectors or unpredictable masters. In their hymns, the gods bring bounty and joy, but also flood, famine, and war. To live in Sumer was to live in constant negotiation with the divine coaxing favor appeasing wrath never certain of tomorrow. There is a curious tidbit in one myth. Inanna, goddess of passion and conflict, once descended into the underworld, stripping away her jewels and garments at each gate until she stood naked before her sister Ereshkigal. The tale is haunting a reminder that even gods must face power beyond themselves. The story whispers through the crowd tonight, sung in fragments, retold in dances where priestesses move with slow grace, shedding veils as they circle the fire. You move deeper into the temple precinct, the ziggurat looming high above. Its steps glow faintly with rows of lamps, each flame like a prayer reaching upward. Priests climb the terraces, their robes trailing, carrying baskets of bread, jars of oil, and bowls of dates. Each offering is set carefully before an altar, accompanied by words in low melodic tones. Smoke curls upward, vanishing into the night sky, as if carried to the gods themselves. Inside a shrine, the air is cooler, thick with shadows. You see a high priestess seated before an altar, her face serene as she pours oil into a shallow dish. The flame sputters, then steadies, casting her profile against painted walls. Around her, musicians pluck lyres their strings, humming softly, while flutes weave high notes through the air. Worship here is not loud, but layered, song-sent light and silence braided into a single act of devotion. Outside again, the crowd surges. Some bring clay figurines, tiny bulls, birds, or human forms to leave at the temple steps. Others whisper prayers over newborn children or clutch the hands of the sick, asking the gods for healing. The gods are everywhere in the rustle of reeds, the gleam of the moon, the murmur of the river. Tonight the people remind themselves that the city is not theirs alone, but shared with powers vast and unseen. Historians still debate whether Sumerian religion was primarily personal or communal. Did each family worship their household deity above all, or did the great temples dominate devotion? Here you see both mothers teaching children to bow before little clay idols at home and priests commanding rituals so grand they echo across the city. It is a balance of intimacy and majesty as fragile as the mud-brick walls. As the drums quiet and the chants fade, torches flicker out one by one. The ziggurat stands against the starlit sky, its shadow long and heavy. The smell of incense lingers, clinging to your hair and clothes, a reminder of the night's communion. People drift back to their homes, carrying with them the comfort, or perhaps the fear, that their gods have listened. And you, standing alone beneath the moon, feel the weight of the divine pressing close, a presence that is both mysterious and eternal. The morning comes with a sharper air, restless and uneasy. You follow the sound of horns echoing across the plain, a warning note that cuts through the clamor of the city. Men hurry to the gates, gripping spears, while women gather children into their arms. Sumer is no longer just a cradle of temples and fields. It is a land of rival city-states, each one fiercely guarding its canals, its gods, and its pride. The gates of mud brick creak open, and you step outside onto the flat expanse. Ahead, two cities face one another, their banners fluttering in the wind. On one side, the emblem of a bull, perhaps On the other, the star of Inanna, perhaps Uruk. Lines of soldiers stand ready, spears, gleaming shields held tight. They are farmers in peacetime, but warriors now called to defend their city's honor and water. Historians still argue whether these early wars were sparked more by practical disputes over irrigation or by pride in temples and gods. What is certain is that the rivers gave life, but they also brought rivalry, for whoever controlled the canals controlled survival itself. There is a curious tidbit recorded in later inscriptions. Some kings boasted not only of victories, but of capturing the very gods of their enemies, carrying statues away from conquered temples. To steal a rival's deity was to rob their city of divine protection, as though tearing its very soul from its walls. Imagine the dread of waking to find your god's shrine empty, your protector vanished into enemy hands. You walk along the battlefield as the armies clash. Dust rises in choking clouds, spears thud against shields, and the shouts of men mix with the cries of the wounded. The sound is raw, not yet the organized thunder of later armies, but the desperate fury of neighbors colliding. Above it all, priests chant from the sidelines, lifting their arms to the gods, calling for favor in the storm of battle. The walls of the city loom in the distance, thick and imposing. Archers line the ramparts, their arrows arching across the plain, their cries sharp as they release. A battering ram of rough timber lurches forward, pushed by straining men. Mud brick cracks beneath its blows, dust showering down as the defenders push back with poles and rocks. You feel the city tremble, the fragile line between survival and ruin stretched taut. Inside, families crouch in their homes, listening to the distant thunder. Children clutch clay figurines of protective gods whispering prayers. Women grind grain quickly, baking flatbread for soldiers who might not return. Fear clings to every shadow, but so too does determination. For them, the city is not just walls and fields, it is life itself worth defending, even against impossible odds. Historians still debate whether these wars unified Sumer in the long run, pushing cities to form alliances, or whether they only deepened rivalries, making the land vulnerable to outside conquest. The answer may be both. In the short term, the wars forged strong kings and proud traditions, but in the long arc of time they drained strength, leaving cracks that future empires would exploit. The sun dips low and the battle wanes. One city's army falters, retreating behind its gates. Trumpets blare in victory, while cries of grief rise from the other side. The victors lift their spoils, grain, weapons, perhaps even a sacred idol, while the defeated smolder in silence, their gods seemingly deaf to their pleas. As you walk back into the city at dusk, torches flare along the gates, welcoming home weary soldiers. Some stride tall with pride, others slump under the weight of loss. The priests light incense, thanking the gods, while mothers search the crowds for familiar faces. The city breathes again, but it is a ragged breath, edged with the knowledge that peace here is fragile, always one quarrel away from war. And you, watching the glow of victory fires flicker on the walls, realize that Sumer's brilliance was always shadowed by rivalry. Its cities rose high, but each one cast long shadows upon the other. The dust of battle has barely settled when you find yourself walking through Uruk, the city that seems to outshine them all. Its walls rise high and wide, stretching further than the eye can follow, said to enclose more than 6 miles of bustling streets. The gates are tall, carved with images of lions and bulls, as if daring enemies to test their strength. You pass through one and feel the pulse of the city like a drumbeat beneath your feet. Inside, life thrums in every corner. Markets overflow with traders, shouting prices over the bleating of goats and the clatter of clay jars. Stalls brim with dates, barley cakes, wool, and bright beads strung on cords. Children dart through the crowds, laughing as they snatch figs from baskets, chased by vendors shaking their fists. The air smells of roasting fish and hot bread smoke, rising in lazy spirals above the rooftops. Historians still argue whether Uruk was truly the world's first great city, or whether smaller towns paved the way before it. What is clear as you wander its streets is that it feels alive in a way no village could. It is not just a cluster of houses, but a machine of humanity, buzzing, churning, always in motion. There is a curious tidbit written on clay tablets. Uruk may have been home to as many as 50,000 people at its height, an astonishing number for its time. To you, walking among the throngs, it feels as if every sound, every scent, every color of the world has been gathered here. The city breathes with thousands of lungs, speaks with thousands of voices. You pause at the foot of the great white temple, its gleaming plaster, reflecting the sun so brightly it seems to glow. The ziggurat beneath it towers above the streets, casting long shadows that stretch across the city. Priests climb its steps with offerings of oil and bread, their robes fluttering in the wind. From below, the people gaze upward, squinting as if the gods themselves might appear at the summit. In another quarter, craftsmen shape copper into tools, the ring of hammers echoing against stone. Potters spin wheels, their hands wet with clay, while weavers sing as they guide wool through looms. Every trade hums like a note in a grand symphony, weaving together the song of the city. You pass murals painted in bright colors, scenes of feasts, battles, and hunts. Some show Gilgamesh himself towering above ordinary men, wrestling lions with bare hands, striding with a confidence that feels larger than life. Children trace the outlines with their fingers, whispering the stories they've heard sung at night. Historians still debate whether Gilgamesh was truly king here, or whether his legend grew so large it eclipsed the truth. But in Uruk, his presence is everywhere, in stories, in art, in the very pride of its people. To them he is both history and myth, their walls and their dreams given human form. As evening comes, the city does not quiet, it transforms. Lamps glow along the streets, their flames reflected in polished bronze mirrors. Musicians gather in courtyards, plucking lyres, tapping drums, their rhythms carrying through the air like a heartbeat. Women dance in flowing skirts, their bracelets jingling, while children spin in dizzy circles. The laughter of feasts mingles with the scent of beer, thick and sweet, served from tall jars. You climb one of the great walls and look out. Beyond lies the flat expanse of fields and canals dotted with distant huts. Inside, Uruk glows with hundreds of tiny fires, a constellation of its own beneath the vast night sky. It is both fragile and eternal, a blaze of human ambition that feels as though it could last forever. And you, standing above the city, realize that Uruk is not just a place. It is an idea that humans can build something greater than themselves, that clay and stone can be shaped into a living heartbeat. The river breeze cools the night, and as dawn creeps across the horizon, you journey southward to another shining jewel of Sumer. Where Uruk is proud and sprawling, feels serene and radiant, its heart bound to the moon itself. From afar you see the massive ziggurat rising, its dark silhouette cut against the pale morning sky, steps climbing steeply to the heavens. It is a temple to Nana the moon, god guardian of the night and keeper of time. You walk the broad processional road leading to the ziggurat. Its bricks glow faintly with the light of dawn, and already priests and priestesses move in solemn lines, carrying baskets of dates, oil, and incense. Their robes are dyed in soft hues, some with silver threads that catch the morning sun as though reflecting moonlight itself. Bells chime softly as they walk, their sound mingling with the distant bleat of goats and the splash of water from nearby canals. Historians still argue whether Ur's devotion to Nana was purely local pride, or whether its temple truly served as a central hub for worship across Sumer. What is certain is that pilgrims came from far and wide, carrying offerings seeking blessings under the watchful eye of the moon god. There is a curious tidbit preserved in inscriptions. Ur's temple complex included a great courtyard where ordinary citizens could gather offering prayers side by side with kings. Unlike some shrines hidden behind walls here, the divine felt closer, accessible, shared by all. Imagine the sound of hundreds of voices lifted together at dusk, calling to the same god as the pale moon, rose above the horizon. You step into the temple precinct where the smell of burning incense curls through the air. Statues of bulls sacred to Nana stand at the entrances, their eyes wide and solemn. A priestess pours water across the altar, murmuring words that echo softly against the brick walls. Behind her, musicians pluck harps and lyres their strings, vibrating in slow, haunting tones as if weaving the night itself into sound. In the marketplace outside the temple, the city bustles. Merchants sell silver trinkets, shaped like crescents, small charms to honor the moon. Bakers arrange round loaves, their shapes mirroring the lunar cycle. Even the rhythm of work here seems tied to the phases of Nana's glow, a celestial calendar written in light. Children play in the shadow of the ziggurat, tossing clay balls back and forth, their laughter rising above the hum of trade. Mothers braid their daughters' hair, singing songs that speak of the moon's watchful gaze, of cycles of renewal and return. In the evenings, families gather on rooftops, lifting their eyes to the silver arc above, whispering thanks for another night of peace. Historians still debate whether the kings of truly ruled as earthly representatives of Nana, or whether that claim was a later invention to bolster their authority. The line between ruler and priest here feels blurred, as though both drink from the same light. To rule was to rule in reflection of the moon, steady, cyclical, watchful. As the day wanes, you stand at the base of the great ziggurat and look upward. Its steps rise steep, its summit glowing in the last rays of sunset. Priests light torches along the terraces, the flames flickering like stars fallen onto stone. As the sky deepens to indigo, the moon itself rises pale and perfect directly above the temple. For a moment it feels as if the ziggurat is a ladder reaching into the heavens, each torch a step toward the god's silver throne. And you, standing among pilgrims and citizens alike, feel the quiet majesty of Where other cities boast of walls and wars, seems to hum with devotion, a city not just built on earth, but aligned with the eternal rhythm of the sky. The air tonight is cooler, touched with the scent of incense and oil lamps burning in quiet corners. You wander into the temple precinct where the ziggurat looms, its terraces glowing faintly in torchlight. But tonight your attention is drawn not to the steps that climb heavenward, but to the voice of a woman whose words ripple across time. She is Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon of Akkad, high priestess of the moon god in and the world's first known author. You sit among a small gathering in a dimly lit chamber, the walls plastered smooth, their surfaces painted with stars and crescent moons. Enheduanna stands before an altar, her long robe flowing, her hair braided neatly and crowned with a simple diadem. She holds a clay tablet in her hands, and her voice carries like the steady rhythm of a lyre. She sings to Inanna, goddess of love, battle, and transformation. Her words are hymns, but they are also deeply personal, filled with longing, despair, and triumph. Historians still argue whether every poem attributed to Enheduanna was truly hers or later works written in her name. Yet the surviving tablets are powerful, unmistakably shaped by a woman who claimed her own voice in a world where writing was often confined to men. There is a curious tidbit in her hymns. She sometimes describes her own exile, cast out from her priestly post during political turmoil, begging Inanna to restore her. The words are raw and human, the voice of a priestess crying not just for her city or her god, but for herself. Imagine the silence of the chamber as her audience listens, feeling her grief and her hope woven together. Her vulnerability becomes sacred, her pain transformed into poetry. The room is hushed, except for the rise and fall of her voice. Each phrase is careful, pressed into the air, as if it might later be pressed into clay. A scribe sits nearby, stylus poised, etching wedges into a tablet that will outlive them all. You hear the soft scratch of clay beneath reed, the sound of memory being trapped for eternity. Outside, the city continues its rhythm. Merchants argue over prices, children splash in canals, priests climb the ziggurat steps. But within this chamber, the mood is different, introspective, intimate. Enheduanna speaks not of trade or war, but of love and loss, of the way gods shape human lives and the way humans in turn reach toward gods with trembling hands. Historians still debate how widely her hymns were known in her own lifetime. Were they sung across temples throughout Sumer or confined to her circle in Ur? Regardless, their survival is remarkable. Thousands of years later, her words are still read, still spoken, still felt. Through her, the Sumerians speak across millennia, their emotions as fresh as if whispered only yesterday. As the hymn ends, Enheduanna lowers her tablet and closes her eyes. The musicians pluck a final chord on their lyres, the sound fading into silence. For a moment, no one moves. The chamber is still lit only by the faint flicker of oil lamps. Then quietly, her listeners bow, not just to the goddess she invoked, but to the woman who dared to give her heart shape in words. You step out into the night, and the moon shines overhead, pale and steady, above Ur's great ziggurat. Enheduanna's voice lingers in your mind, her hymns mingling with the rustle of palms, the ripple of water, the hum of life. And you realize you have witnessed something extraordinary, not only the devotion of a priestess, but the birth of authorship. The moment when a human voice stepped forward and declared, "This is mine, this is me." The next morning, the city stirs with a different energy. Merchants are not shouting quite so loudly. Children are hushed, and in the temple square a small crowd gathers under the watchful eye of priests. At the center stands a man with a clay tablet, the sun gleaming off its wet surface. His stylus scratches as he presses lines into the clay, not to record grain or hymns, but something far more ambitious, rules meant to bind the city together. You lean closer and catch the rhythm of his words. These are not stories, but laws, decrees about marriage, property, theft, and violence. The people listen with wary eyes, some nodding, others frowning as the rules are read aloud. For the first time, justice here is not just the whim of a ruler or priest, but shaped into written form, fixed in clay, like the very bricks of the city. Historians still argue whether these earliest codes were truly meant to protect ordinary people, or whether they primarily served kings and temples. What is clear is that the act of writing law transforms power. Once words are etched in clay, they cannot be denied, even by those who rule. There is a curious tidbit from one surviving fragment: laws sometimes carried penalties, paid not in death, but in barley or silver. A thief might restore stolen goods and add more as penalty, his punishment not only fear, but debt. Imagine the marketplace buzzing with whispers, so-and-so paid 10 measures for his crime. In this way, justice became part of the economy, another form of trade. The square fills with murmurs as more rules are read. One protects the weak. If a man injures another, he must pay compensation. Another protects trade. If a merchant cheats his buyer, the law will hold him accountable. Others, harsher, declare that certain crimes may cost a life. The crowd shifts uneasily, glancing at one another, measuring their own risks under this new weight of order. You notice a young scribe setting aside the tablet to dry in the sun. Its surface gleams, each wedge sharp and deliberate. Tomorrow another tablet will be pressed, another copy distributed to shrines or courts. Slowly a network of clay spreads across the city, a silent web of rules binding everyone from farmers to kings. Historians still debate how strictly these early laws were enforced, whether every tablet was followed, or whether power still bent them in practice. Perhaps both were true, The law was both shield and weapon, offering protection to some while justifying control for others. The city itself seems to adjust. Neighbors settle disputes not only with angry shouts or fists, but by pointing to clay records invoking rules now greater than themselves. Priests remind worshippers that even the gods demand order, that law is not just human invention, but divine will. Slowly the people grow accustomed to living under words as much as under rulers. As evening comes, you walk past a courtyard where families gather to eat. Bread is broken, beer, poured, laughter shared. Yet in the corner a man whispers of a neighbor fined for a broken contract. Another mutters of a thief caught by guards. The law is everywhere now, creeping into conversation, shaping fear and fairness alike. The oil lamps burn low and the moon rises above the ziggurat. The laws etched in clay harden in the cooling night air, becoming as permanent as the stars overhead. And you, sitting among the quiet crowd, realize you are witnessing something fragile yet monumental, the first steps toward justice made visible, a society daring to write down what it means to live together. The air feels different now, heavy with the scent of dust carried on the wind. You walk through the streets of and hear whispers, rumors of strangers from the north, men who speak a different tongue, led by a ruler whose name is already becoming legend, Sargon of Akkad. The Sumerians have weathered many rivalries, but this feels different. The horizon itself seems restless, as though change is marching toward the city walls. At the gates, soldiers sharpen spears and string bows. Their faces are drawn, their voices quiet. The people inside go about their business, but there is tension in every gesture. Merchants clutch their goods a little tighter. Mothers hurry children indoors. Priests climb the ziggurat to offer more sacrifices, chanting louder, as if the gods might be swayed by desperate voices. Historians still argue whether Sargon's conquest of Sumer was sudden and brutal, or gradual, woven through alliances and trade. What is certain is that Akkad rose swiftly, binding the land of Sumer beneath one crown for the first time in history. To the Sumerians it must have felt as if the rivers themselves had shifted their course, redirected by unseen hands. There is a curious tidbit from later inscriptions. Sargon claimed he had been set afloat in a basket on the river as an infant, rescued and raised by a humble gardener. The story echoes through later myths of other great leaders, a reminder that power often cloaks itself in wonder. Whether true or crafted, the tale made his rise feel destined, as though even the gods had chosen him. You follow the streets toward the temple square, where leaders gather in urgent council. Voices rise, debating whether to resist or to submit. Some argue that the gods of Sumer will never allow a foreigner to rule their cities. Others point out that the gods may now favor the stronger hand. The Lugal listens in silence, his brow furrowed, as though weighing the future in his palms. The clash, when it comes, is swift. You watch dust rise from the plain as Akkadian soldiers march their spears, gleaming their discipline, unyielding. The Sumerian army meets them, fierce but fragmented, each city-state more loyal to itself than to a common cause. The air fills with the roar of men, the clang of bronze, the cries of the fallen. For all their bravery, the Sumerians cannot stand as one, and the Akkadians press forward. The walls of the city tremble under their assault. Gates shudder, torches flare, and shouts echo through the streets. Yet within days the banners of Akkad fly above towers that once bore Sumerian symbols. The people look on in silence, some fearful, others resigned, a few even hopeful that new rulers may bring new stability. Historians still debate whether Sargon's empire crushed Sumer's spirit or preserved it under a wider rule. After all, the gods, the language, the stories of Sumer did not vanish. They seeped into Akkad, shaping the conquerors as much as the conquered. but to those who lived here, it must have felt like the end of an age, the quiet fall of cities once thought eternal. That night, you walk along the canals. The water reflects the moon, pale and steady, but the air carries the faint scent of smoke from burned-out homes. The people whisper in doorways, unsure of what tomorrow will bring. Children still play with clay toys, lovers still meet in shadowed corners, bread still bakes on hot stones, but over it all lies a hush, the uneasy silence of a world changed forever. And you, standing in the dark, realize that the fall of Sumer is not a single collapse, but a slow transformation, the rivers of history carrying one city's story into another's stream. The streets feel quieter now. You wander through canals that once bustled with barges, only to find water running shallow and sluggish. The air is hot, heavier than before, and the soil beneath your feet cracks into webs of dust. Farmers kneel in empty furrows, their hands, sifting dry earth eyes turned skyward in hope that rain might come. The fields of barley that once swayed like golden seas now lie brittle, their stalks bending lifeless in the wind. The rivers that once gave Sumer life are shifting. Their courses meander, their floods less predictable. Canals clog with silt, their walls collapsing where no one has the strength to maintain them. Irrigation, the miracle that fed cities, begins to fail. Historians still argue whether drought or salinization played the greater role in Sumer's decline, whether it was climate overuse or sheer bad luck. All you feel standing here is the weight of loss, the silence of a land growing weary. There is a curious tidbit found in surviving tablets. Scribes complained of barley yield shrinking, of taxes harder to collect, of gods seemingly withholding favor. Some tablets record barley replaced by wheat as salt crept into the soil, an adaptation that bought time but not salvation. Imagine a farmer watching his fields whiten with salt crystals, knowing each year his land would yield less. You walk into the city and see the effects. Markets once crowded with baskets of grain now stand sparse. Merchants grumble their goods fewer, their voices less confident. Families trade what little they have, dates wool a clay figurine handed over in desperation for a sack of barley. Hunger lingers in the air, an invisible shadow haunting every corner. Temples continue their rituals, priests pouring oil, chanting hymns, offering sacrifices. Yet the crowds are smaller, the offerings fewer. People glance at the gods' statues with suspicion, whispering that the divine has turned its face away. Some leave their homes entirely, drifting toward other lands, searching for greener fields and gentler waters. The city feels thinner, its heartbeat slower. Historians still debate whether foreign invasions or environmental collapse struck the final blow. Was it Akkadian dominance, Gutian raids, or failing rivers that carried Sumer into silence? Perhaps all combined, each wave of trouble, eroding the walls until even the strongest bricks gave way. You pass by a scribe hunched over his tablet. His stylus presses, slowly recording lists of rationed barley. His hand trembles, his eyes weary. Around him, children gather, watching in silence. Once writing was a marvel, a tool of power. Now it feels like a record of decline, clay remembering what people would rather forget. In the fields beyond, oxen stand idle, ribs showing beneath their hides. Farmers no longer sing as they plough, instead they trudge in silence, their hope shrinking with each furrow. Canals, once alive with the chatter of workers, lie dry, and cracked frogs gone reeds brittle. The land itself seems to sigh as though tired of bearing the weight of cities. Night falls and the air cools slightly. Families huddle together in courtyards, sharing thin bread and watered beer. They tell stories of better days, of kings who built mighty walls, of gods who blessed their harvests. Children listen wide-eyed as if those days belong to another world, a dream slipping further away each night. And you, standing in the shadows, realize that decline does not always come with fire and conquest. Sometimes it comes with silence, with dust, with rivers that forget their course, with fields that no longer sing. Sumer's fall is not sudden, but slow like clay, crumbling back into earth like whispers, fading into the wind. The night is still, the city subdued. Yet, as you walk through the streets, you realize that not everything has vanished. Even as fields dry and walls crumble, the voices of Sumer linger, echoing far beyond their fallen cities. You hear them in the songs sung by merchants from Babylon, in the stories whispered in Akkadian courts, in the prayers carried east and west by traders and scribes. Sumer itself may falter, but its memory flows outward like rivers, finding new courses after a flood. You pause by a small shrine, its bricks worn, its offerings sparse. A priest lights a lamp before a statue of Inanna, the goddess's eyes glinting faintly in the flame. The worshippers are fewer now, yet her image endures, carried into new pantheons, renamed and reshaped but never erased. Historians still argue whether later deities like Ishtar or Aphrodite are direct heirs of Inanna, or whether they simply bear echoes of her. Either way, the thread runs clear. The Sumerian gods live on even as their cities fade. There is a curious tidbit etched into tablets discovered far from Sumerian hymns, copied by scribes in schools centuries later, long after the cities themselves had declined. Students struggled to keep the old language alive, writing line after line, as if practicing scales of memory. Imagine the scene, a boy hunched over a clay tablet in Babylon, grumbling as he copies Sumerian verses, never having seen or Uruk himself, yet keeping their voices alive. You wander into the marketplace, smaller now, but still humming with life. A merchant displays beads of lapis lazuli, another offers silver rings. Their words are no longer purely Sumerian, but mixed with Akkadian, the languages entwined like threads in a single cloth. The crowd seems to know this is how survival works, not by resisting change entirely, but by weaving old and new together. Historians still debate whether the Akkadian Empire preserved Sumer's legacy out of respect or simply absorbed it out of necessity. Yet the evidence remains: Sumerian words seep into Akkadian texts. Their myths retold, their gods honored under new names. In this way, Sumer does not vanish, it transforms. You pass a house where a family sits together. A grandmother tells children of Gilgamesh, her voice trembling but firm. The children lean close, eyes wide, as though hearing the tale for the first time. They do not care that Akkadian soldiers walk the streets outside, or that the language of their tablets shifts. To them, Gilgamesh is alive. Enkidu still runs wild, the gods still shape their world. Memory is their fortress, one no conqueror can breach. The ziggurat towers above its plaster, worn, its steps cracked, yet torches still burn on its terraces. Priests climb in steady lines, chanting hymns that echo across the city. The crowd that gathers is smaller than before, but they bow their heads with the same reverence. For them, the gods have not left, even if their harvests have. Faith endures, stubborn as clay baked in fire. As night deepens, you look beyond the city walls. The land stretches outward, dotted with other settlements, other lights flickering against the darkness. Some are Akkadian, some still Sumerian, all connected by the same rivers. The story of one city flows into another, the way rivers merge and spread into deltas, carrying silt that nourishes distant shores. And you, standing on the wall, realize that Sumer is not gone. Its words, its myths, its gods have already slipped beyond its boundaries. They will appear in Babylonian libraries, in Assyrian temples, in the scrolls and stories of lands not yet born. Sumer's fall is quiet, but its echo will never truly fade. The night is warm, the air carrying the faint scent of river reeds and baked clay, and you find yourself walking once more among the ruins of Sumer's first cities. Walls that once stood tall now crumble into mounds of earth, their edges softened by centuries of wind. The canals are shallow, clogged with silt, their banks overgrown with wild grasses. Yet as you wander, you feel the presence of voices still lingering here like whispers carried on the breeze. You step into what was once a courtyard. The bricks are worn smooth, scattered in heaps, but if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the laughter of children, the low hum of merchants, the echo of hymns sung to the gods. The city is gone, yet its memory clings stubbornly to the clay as if the earth itself remembers. Historians still argue whether Sumer truly ended or simply dissolved into the Akkadian and Babylonian worlds that followed. The distinction feels small as you walk among these ruins. Civilizations do not vanish like torches blown out. They smolder their embers, feeding the fires of those who come after. There is a curious tidbit told by modern excavators. Many of these ancient cities were rediscovered beneath layers of earth so thick that locals once mistook the mounds for natural hills. Imagine standing on one of those mounds, unaware you were walking atop the bones of Uruk or the first true cities the world had ever known. Only when spades struck clay tablets did the voices of Sumer rise again. The ziggurats, once stairways to heaven, are reduced to broken terraces, yet at night, when the moon casts its silver light on their ruins, they still seem to climb skyward. The gods may have been renamed, their temples rebuilt in other cities, but here the stones themselves feel sacred, as though touched by hands that reached not only for the heavens, but for eternity. You walk further and see scattered tablets lying in the dust, their wedges faint but still legible. You trace the marks with your fingertips and realize that even as walls collapsed and fields withered, these words endured. The clay holds stories, laws, accounts, and dreams, voices of farmers, kings, and poets who never imagined you would be reading them millennia later. Historians still debate what was more remarkable, the cities themselves or the memory they left behind. The people of Sumer may have faded, but their language, their myths, and their inventions became the foundation stones of countless others. Writing law, epic poetry, irrigation, these gifts spread outward, never fully lost. As the wind rises, carrying dust across the plain, you feel Sumer's quiet fall around you. No armies march here anymore, no priests climb ziggurats, no merchants haggle in markets. Instead, there is silence, broken only by the rustle of grass and the distant cry of a bird. The world's first cities have returned to the earth, their grandeur softened into whispers. And yet, standing here, you realize this is not the end. Sumer lives in every story told, every contract written, every prayer whispered to a god in any language. Their rise was bold, their fall was quiet, but their echo is eternal. The streets are quieter this morning, not with the hush of decline, but with the gentle hum of daily life. You leave the shadow of the ziggurat and wander into narrow lanes where the city breathes more softly. Here, away from councils and kings, you meet the heartbeat of Sumer, not in rulers or priests, but in ordinary people, each weaving threads into the fabric of civilization. You pass a courtyard where a potter sits before a wheel, his hands dark with clay. The wheel spins smoothly, a marvel of simple design, and he shapes jars with practiced ease. Each vessel is both art and necessity, destined to carry water beer or oil. Children giggle nearby, dipping their fingers into clay, smearing patterns across their arms. The potter smiles faintly, shaking his head, but lets them play. Work here is not only labor, but rhythm as natural as breathing. Historians still argue whether the potter's wheel came first in Sumer or spread from elsewhere, but here It feels inevitable, an invention born of hands that needed more than strength, hands that loved shaping earth into permanence. Further along, the air grows thick with the sweet scent of beer. You find a group of brewers bent over vats of barley mash steam rising in soft clouds. They stir with long paddles, their arms glistening with sweat. Women pour frothy liquid into tall jars, sealing them with clay stoppers. The brewers laugh as they work, teasing one another, sipping from reed straws. Beer here is not just drink. It is daily bread, in liquid form, nourishment and joy. There is a curious tidbit preserved on tablets. Some of the earliest wages were paid not in silver or grain, but in beer. Imagine finishing a long day and being handed jars of thick, sweet brew, your pay measured in gulps rather than coins. Even gods were offered beer bowls poured out in temples, as though heaven too needed refreshment. You wander further, where shepherds drive flocks through dusty alleys, their sheep bleating their bells, jangling softly. Children run alongside waving sticks, guiding strays back to the herd. The animals provide wool, milk, meat, each one a moving piece of wealth. Shepherds sing as they walk simple songs that carry across the fields, part prayer, part lullaby, meant as much for the sheep as for themselves. The marketplace bustles with quieter trades. A woman sells reed mats, another clay, figurines shaped like protective spirits. A young boy hawks onions, his voice high and eager, while his sister balances baskets of figs on her head. Bargaining is not fierce here, but playful, with laughter woven into every deal. You hear one man joke that the onions are so strong they could make even the gods cry, and the crowd chuckles. Historians still debate whether humor survives in tablets or only in fleeting oral stories. Most records are serious trade law prayers, but life itself could not have been only solemn. Here in the marketplace you feel it, the wink of an eye, the tug of a smile, the lightness that makes toil bearable. In a shaded alley, a mother grinds barley on a stone quern, her rhythm steady. She hums a tune, her voice low and soothing. Beside her, a child shapes a toy, an ox, with 4 stubby legs pressed from clay. The child's laughter fills the air, echoing off mud-brick walls. Civilization may be remembered for its kings and temples, but its roots lie here in the hum of mothers and the giggles of children. The day wears on and you sense the city's pulse in every corner. Bakers stoke ovens, their bread fragrant and warm. Weavers twist wool into threads, their fingers nimble. A fisherman hauls nets from the canal, silver-scaled fish flopping as he sorts them into baskets. Each task is small, but together they build the unseen foundation of the city, the steady labor that keeps walls standing and gods fed. Historians still debate whether the Sumerians truly saw themselves as a unified people, or simply as citizens of many city-states. But in the laughter of brewers, the songs of shepherds, and the chatter of markets, you hear a common voice, the sound of humanity, learning how to live together in ever larger circles. As night falls, families gather in courtyards, fires glow, bread is broken, and beer is shared. Stories are told not just of kings and gods, but of small triumphs and jokes from the day. A father recounts how his donkey refused to move until bribed with figs. The children laugh so loudly they nearly spill their supper. The stars emerge overhead, steady and timeless, but below them life continues in simple joy. And you, sitting in the glow of the fire, realize that the greatness of Sumer was not only in its ziggurats or epics, but in its people, their hands shaping clay, their songs rising over fields, their humor carrying them through hardship. Civilization rests as much in laughter and bread as in law and conquest. The night sky stretches wide, clear, and glittering above the flat horizon. You leave the courtyards where families laugh and drift toward the ziggurat, where a different kind of gathering takes place. At its summit, Priests sit in silence, their eyes turned upward, watching the stars. Oil lamps flicker at their feet, but their attention is fixed on the heavens. Here the gods speak not in words, but in light and shadow in the dance of stars across the night. The air grows cooler as you climb the steps. From this height, the city lies hushed. Below its torches, tiny sparks against the dark plain. The fields are faint shadows, the rivers like silver ribbons. But above the sky blazes alive. The priests point to constellations, naming them softly: the plough, the bull, the lion. Each cluster is more than stars. It is a sign, a message, a fragment of divine order. Historians still argue whether Sumerian astronomy began as science or religion, whether they tracked the heavens to understand the gods' will or to measure time for farming. Likely it was both. In their minds, the movements of the sky were not abstract. They were the gods writing across darkness. There is a curious tidbit found on clay tablets, Sumerian star charts among the oldest in the world, mapping planets and recording eclipses. Imagine a scribe pressing wedges into clay to note that Venus rose before dawn or that the moon grew dark in an untimely eclipse. To them, these were not cold facts, but omens with weight signs of favor or disaster. You sit among the priests as they whisper of meanings. A star that lingers low on the horizon might foretell a good harvest. A sudden eclipse might warn of war. The rustle of reeds in the wind becomes the murmur of gods confirming or complicating the message. The priests consult tablets filled with past signs, comparing the present sky to the memory of others long gone. The city below depends on these readings. Farmers look to priests to say when to plant barley, when to harvest dates, when to brace for floods. Kings listen for warnings of rebellion or promise of victory. A single star might sway decisions that shape thousands of lives. You feel the weight of it as you watch them trace lines in the sky, their voices calm but heavy with consequence. Historians still debate how accurate Sumerian astronomy truly was. Some say they could predict eclipses, others argue they merely recorded them. But accuracy was less important than belief. To the people of Sumer, the heavens were alive, and to ignore them was to risk disaster. Nearby, a young apprentice squints at the sky, then scratches notes on a tablet. His stylus moves carefully, copying wedge marks with practiced hand. His master corrects him gently, reminding him to note the time, the position, the exact shade of the moon's light. This is how knowledge endures, not in sudden revelation, but in endless repetition, each student carrying the sky's memory forward. The air grows colder, the stars brighter. A priest lifts his hands and chants softly to Nana, the moon god, thanking him for guidance, begging him for mercy. The others bow their heads, murmuring in unison. The chant rises like a low hum, blending with the night breeze, a song meant for ears far beyond mortal reach. There is a ripple of unease when a star flares briefly, then fades. The priests exchange glances, whispering in tones too low for you to hear. Perhaps it is nothing, perhaps it is everything. Already you sense the story forming tomorrow. The city will whisper of omens of gods displeased or gods preparing something new. And yet standing here, you feel more than fear. You feel wonder. The stars shine cold and eternal, but their patterns comfort you, steady as a heartbeat. For all their fragility, the people of Sumer looked upward and saw not chaos, but meaning. In the endless sky they found order, a mirror for their own yearning. As dawn approaches, the priests descend the steps, their faces calm, their decisions made. The city will wake soon, ready to hear the will of the heavens. The stars fade, the horizon brightens, and you walk down with them, the night's whispers still echoing in your mind. The city stirs with dawn, but instead of joining the bustle of markets or fields, you follow a narrow path leading beyond the walls. The air grows stiller here, the sounds of life fading until only the rustle of reeds and the call of distant birds remain. Ahead lies a low mound of earth, a place of the dead where families come to leave offerings. Here the Sumerians faced the one certainty that even kings could not escape death and the quiet underworld that waited for all. You step into the shade of a small shrine. Its bricks are simple, its altar bare, except for bowls of bread and jars of beer. The offerings are not extravagant, but steady, as though persistence itself might comfort the departed. Families kneel, whispering the names of loved ones, pressing their hands to the earth, as though the soil could carry their touch downward. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians truly believed in divine reward, or whether they saw the afterlife as a shadow of life above dim, joyless, inevitable. Their myths speak of Ker, the land of no return, where all souls go, whether king or farmer. It is not a paradise, but a twilight realm ruled by Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld. There is a curious tidbit in one of their stories. Inanna, goddess of love and war, once descended to this realm. She passed through 7 gates, stripped of her jewels and robes, until she stood naked before her sister, Ereshkigal. There she was, struck down, hung on a hook, like a carcass, until her rescue was bargained by the gods above. The tale is haunting, but it reveals the Sumerian view that no one, not even a goddess, escapes the shadowed silence of death. You walk among shallow graves, some marked with simple stones, others with clay jars pressed into the earth. Bodies were often buried beneath homes wrapped in mats, their presence woven into daily life. Families lived above their ancestors, cooking, laughing, praying with the dead beneath their feet. It was not separation, but continuity, life and death sharing the same roof. Children leave small clay toys at the graves, oxen birds, little figurines shaped like humans with wide eyes. Adults pour libations of beer into the soil, the liquid soaking into the ground, as though feeding thirsty souls below. Bread is left to crumble, dates to wither. The belief is simple yet profound. Even in the land of no return, the dead might hunger, might thirst, might still listen when their names are spoken. Historians still debate whether these rituals were acts of devotion, fear, or habit. Perhaps they were all three. To the living, remembering the dead was not just kindness, it was survival, a way to ensure the dead did not grow restless and slip back among the living. You pause at a wall where mourners have etched symbols into clay bricks, circles, stars, lines like waves. Some scholars call them prayers, others graffiti. Whatever they were, they remain silent marks of grief and memory, pressed by hands long gone. The sun climbs higher, the air warming, yet the mound feels cool, shaded by silence. You close your eyes and imagine the underworld as the Sumerians did, a place of dust, where spirits sit in shadow, clothed in feathers, drinking from muddy water. It is not punishment, not torment, but a weary continuation. Kings and beggars alike sit together, all pride erased, all stories muted. The land of no return does not care for crowns, and yet there is dignity in the rituals above. Even knowing the underworld was bleak, families still offered bread and beer, still whispered names. Memory was a fragile rebellion against silence, a way to keep the dead alive in the only place that mattered, the hearts of those still breathing. As evening falls, the mourners drift back to the city. The mound lies quiet, the offerings left behind. The wind rustles reeds, carrying whispers across the plain. And you, standing in the fading light, realize that the Sumerians built not only cities and stories, but bridges to the dead, fragile, yes, but enduring, as long as someone remembered to speak a name. The journey grows softer now, the dust of ancient cities settling gently in the evening air. You walk slowly, your steps quiet as though not to disturb the ruins. The canals glimmer faintly under the moon, their waters shallow but steady, carrying reflections of stars across the plain. It feels as if the night itself has paused, holding you in its stillness. You let your breath, slow, deep, and easy. The voices of farmers, priests, and scribes fade into the distance, like echoes across a vast canyon. All that remains is the rhythm of your own heartbeat, calm and steady, in tune with the flow of the river. The gods of Sumer slip into shadow, their names drifting like smoke, yet their presence lingers, gentle and timeless. The ruins rise around you, softened by moonlight, no longer sharp or imposing, but tender like old memories. The earth cradles them now, carrying their stories in silence. You reach out and let your fingers brush against a fragment of clay, its surface cool, its marks faint, but still they're a reminder that even whispers can endure through ages. The air grows cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and reeds. A faint breeze stirs, soothing and steady, wrapping around you like a blanket. You lift your eyes to the horizon where the stars burn bright, countless and serene, watching, as they always have, long before the first brick was laid in Sumer, long after the last wall has crumbled. And now, as the night deepens, you feel yourself drift into that same rhythm, quiet, steady, eternal. The story rests, the rivers murmur, the cities sleep. You close your eyes, letting go, carried gently into dreams, sweet dreams.